Good morning. Please take a seat. Let's close the doors. And welcome back. Ooh, Tess just made it. Hi, Tess. Welcome back. Tazeen Noorani, everybody. That's what happens if you enter late. So welcome back, everybody, to this, what I think is a very important panel, including participant perspectives. So, as you may have seen me running around, I have many different roles. I wear different hats. And one of the hats that I also wear is that of a qualitative researcher. So I do research into patient or participant experiences who have been treated with different psychedelics, with ketamine, with psilocybin for depression, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. And from my own experience, I know how important it is to really listen to patients or to participants and to understand how they experience the treatment. And my focus is mainly on what they experience during the treatment. And today we'll focus a little bit more about what experiences people have in the whole clinical trial process. So we extend that period a little bit of what we're looking at. And I hope we'll come to a closer understanding of what their experience is like. Because I think that's something that's often glanced over or neglected. And it's crucial because, as you guys just said, I mean, without participants, there is no clinical research. So we're trying to move away from numbers and into personal experiences. Before we do that, Pedram, who's also my colleague, but who's also a former participant in the MDMA trial, will give a few introductory words. And interestingly, and then I'll stop talking, interestingly, we invited Pedram at the 2020 conference to share his experiences as a former participant. And out of that, we came into contact, and then when we needed somebody to help us out at the Opal Foundation, he applied, and we became colleagues, and it's been an absolute pleasure working with him. And it's very important to have him always emphasize the inclusion of participants, of patients, in this whole thing. So, and this is the culmination of many of these discussions that we've had. So I'll hand over to you, Pedram.
Welcome. All right. So yeah, like Yo said, I think when I first decided to take on this role of putting this conference together, I was like, okay, that's number one goal. Then the second goal was I wanted to make sure this panel exists because I think this is a historic moment, at least as far as I'm aware. In no other psychedelic conference there has ever been a panel dedicated specifically to participants. So we're making history here. All right. So psychedelic therapy. Dismantling the miraculous cure without causing disillusionment. That's really the goal. So we are here to get some unbiased, nuanced, and critical perspective by research participants about psychedelic health claims and the inflated hype. We'll be discussing the delicate balancing act between saving lives and crushing hope. Psychedelic therapy is not a cure. It's a catalyst for healing. So these are the points that I'll be making are pretty much my own lived experiences and what I've learned. So I stand by these, and we can always have questions afterwards. But I believe an only medicalized approach to mental health is simply a symptom management while ignoring the real root cause. Psychedelic therapy is based on the notion of quick fix. But healing doesn't mean ending trauma and suffering. Healing means learning to live a meaningful life despite the trauma and suffering. Also, nothing works 100% of the time for 100% of people. Psychedelic therapies are not for all. A significant minority of people may not have beneficial experiences, and we need to be ready for supporting them after trials end. Am I going? Let me see. Looks like. There we go. Here we are. Okay. It's hard to coordinate the two. A response to danger is actually not a disease, and the diagnosis label is really not a solution. I believe experiencing emotional pain in response to traumatic events is not an illness. It's actually pretty normal given what one is going through in life. That brings me to the next point. Medicalization and privatization of emotional pain and mental suffering is actually not helping people. So we need to change the narrative so that experiencing our emotions strongly or going through a difficult time in life doesn't get labeled as being mentally ill. So it's time we treat people like plants. I read an article just a couple of weeks ago and this really resonated with me. And the reason is because when plants are not doing well, we change their conditions, right? You know, we change the soil, maybe we make sure that they get better lighting, maybe they got too much light, we remove them from the light. So maybe we could start treating people, instead of patients, treating them like plants, right? Because I believe that if we do that, then we can all flourish. So the most effective mental health treatment actually will not be psychedelic therapy. I believe it will be transforming the society that is causing our suffering. We are living in a traumatizing, overwhelming, and uncertain world. I actually don't think suffering can be eradicated, but I think we can change how we see it so we can suffer less from suffering. So we need to address the real root cause, not just the symptoms. Currently, we treat the symptoms, and our hope is that with psychedelic therapy, we can treat the root cause. But what if the root cause is the broken society, and the trauma is the symptom that is holding people captive? Now let's come together to optimize the beneficial use of psychedelic therapy while we're also transforming the society. That's my mic drop now.
So we can dedicate the next hour to answering all of these deep, profound, systemic issues. I propose we don't do that, but we invite Leonie and Ian on stage. So please join us for this discussion. So I'm not sure if everybody was in the previous panel. So maybe it's good to start this panel out by just giving you giving a very brief introduction of where you come from, where you came from in this, how you came to participate in a trial with psychedelics, and which trial that was.
So yes, I've struggled with anxiety and depression for most of my adult life, as you've heard during the presentation if you were here. I burnt out and broke down in about 2014, desperately looking around for something that would help me, and came across a lecture by Robin Carhart Harris at Imperial College, saying they were going to do a study looking at the effects of psilocybin on depression. So I applied for that and very luckily became one of just 20 people that got onto that trial, and that has been the best treatment for my depression to date. Had an afterglow that lasted 3 to 6 months, and then if anyone was here for Eddie's presentation, that whole cycle he outlined, that's exactly what happened to me. Getting back in touch with the clinical team, you know, desperately, increasingly desperate. I need this again, I know it works, you know. It took me 4 years to then take part in the Compass Pathways trial in 2019, and had a very different effect. There was no afterglow. Depression came back while I was in the room. So arguably you could say, oh, it's failed. But it still set me off on a different therapeutic path. Having a team around me who helped me to reframe that experience to maybe you didn't get what you wanted, but maybe you got what you needed, and it was true. I'd been in a place that had reminded me of the insights I had during the first trial, and then it was on me, in a non-punishing kind of way. I tried to do it in a compassionate way, but it was on me to start doing more of the hard work, to try and change certain things in my life, to get, you know, to try and improve my mental health. So both trials, very different outcomes, but with, yeah, different positive outcomes, really, I would say, overall.
Who was here for the previous talks? I don't want to, okay, so let me see if I can say something different. My name's Leonie Schneider. I was first diagnosed with depression during my honours degree, so 1998, and was very much not treated as a plant. It was the first time I realized I was the patient and I was ill, and worse than that, it's neurochemistry, so this is likely to be with me for life. Oh, look, you feel really depressed again. This is definitely going to be with you for life, so just stay on them prophylactically for the rest of your life. This is who you are. And what I noticed is that with each attempt to deal with, whenever life threw me something really punishing, I had a lot of trauma in South Africa, violent crime, domestic violence. When things bubbled up too much and became too much, instead of dealing with the root causes, building that resilience, getting that support to process those traumas, I was just given a different antidepressant or a different type of talking therapy. Never really getting to the bottom. And I think if you have these entrenched patterns, you can't unthink yourself out of a thinking problem. I was at Mendel's talk yesterday, and he was saying, you learn to walk by walking, you learn to talk by talking, you learn to feel safe by feeling safe. So trying to talk my way out of it, trying to medicate my way out of it wasn't working. So putting myself forward for the Imperial trial, the second Imperial trial, I really came to that first experience of really feeling safe. And for me, trying to do that, learn to feel safe by feeling safe, and that's what that psychedelic therapy treatment afforded me. It was the start of a process. I almost think when these become corporate treatments, the box should say, warning, this is the start of a really long process. Think twice before you embark on this process, because it is a long and hard process. The antidepressants numb things. It's almost easier to cope with things that way, whereas when you're unmedicated, you talk about emotional blunting with SSRIs. Well, I went to emotional flooding, and what the process since has been trying to come to that pendulum swing somewhere in the middle and find myself as a non-broken person, which was really my insight on the Imperial trial, that I was not my depression, I wasn't broken, I was responding to all the things that had been happening. So fortunately, feeling wobbly, trying to still cope with all of this, need further insight, want to continue deepening the learning. Did the DMT trial in January this year, intravenous DMT, which the results haven't been published. Different, insanely intense experience, and deeply somatic. It was a real body experience for me. And still continuing on that path, and I feel really honored to be able to talk about it and to bring the human face to it, and hoping that a lot of other people will find healing on the same journey.
So my name is Pedram, as maybe some of you already know. So I participated in an open label phase 2 trial of MDMA therapy in Canada. I was the 7th person ever to receive this medication legally in Canada. So it was definitely something that absolutely changed my life in many different ways. I'm a completely new person in good ways and in maybe not so good ways sometimes. And that's really, I think, what's important, why we're here to talk about that, because there's no amount of preparation that could go, like 3 psychotherapy sessions to talk about how your life is going to change after. It's just not enough. And I think although most things went really well for me during the trial, I felt very unsupported as soon as the trial ended. And I feel like we're still treating people like rats in clinical trials. They come in, we do something to them, and then once it's out, they're out. No one has yet called me since then to see how I'm doing. And I think this is something that we need to improve on. We need to make sure that people are supported after. I was lucky enough to have support in my family, my lovely wife, my parents here and there, some friends, some colleagues, but I feel like that's really an area that I want to advocate for, that we continue to support people, whether the trial went well or it didn't went well. We need more support, so.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, is this so on? Yes. Okay. Good. Yeah. We'll get to that. I think it's a very important point. Before continuing, I would just like to explicitly acknowledge your courage and your openness to being here, to sharing your personal story, because that is, I think it's very important. I think it's very important. I think it's hugely needed, and I think it's very brave and important that you're here. So thank you for that. Now moving on, taking a little bit of a chronological approach, because I think this is something that many people may not be aware of, but can one of you say a little bit about what it's like as a participant when you get enrolled into a clinical trial? So from the very first moment that you hear about a trial, maybe until the moment that the treatment actually starts?
Yeah, it's quite a long, arduous task, particularly when you're struggling with your mental health during that period. Luckily in 2015 there wasn't the hype there is now, but I know for you guys it's probably placed all the more pressure on you to kind of get this wonder cure, you know. So it took about, I think, 9 months maybe between applying for the Imperial trial before they said, oh, we're doing the second round of, you know, screening and, you know, admissions or whatever you want to call it. So I'd lived in that space for 9 months, not knowing, am I going to get this treatment? Mental health unraveling, you know, feeling increasingly desperate. So there's that. You wait and you wait and you wait. Then you have the screening, and I think that's something that's become more stringent as well as the more money's come into this. And maybe it's a safeguarding thing. Maybe it's a way of protecting the results in a way as well. I don't know. There's people in this room that would be able to assure me of that. Either way, maybe. Yeah, it's hard to get onto these trials. So there's that element as well. And when it's double blind as well, you know, there's that element of not getting the treatment. But to get back to the actual process, questionnaires is one word that I would use to sum up a lot of the process. Questionnaire after questionnaire after questionnaire. And when you're struggling to cope with day-to-day life, having that additional administrative burden on you to access the treatment you desperately need and hope is finally going to be something that works for you, it's massive. And we all understand that it's science, you know, it's research. People need data, you know, but what we really need to say is we're more than the points on the graph. We're more than the pie in the pie charts. We're more than the brains that have been scanned. We're human beings, you know. So I'm feeling a bit upset now. Yeah, but it's really, really important to stress that. And for people in this research, I really hope you all know that there are human beings on the other side that may be feeling overwhelmed by what you're asking them to do. And this is why it's really important for our perspectives to be woven through every single step of what you do. You know, don't just use us at the end of the trial for some nice media and PR, which is draining in itself, you know. Tap into our experience, you know. Ask us, how's it been? What was right? What was wrong? What can we do differently, you know? So I feel like I'm preaching a bit now, but you know, it's like so, so important, and it's not happening enough at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, does any of you want to add to your experiences?
Yeah, so for me, actually, what I found out was that my therapists were just going through the training. So they needed to have one single case in order for them to be able to actually get to the phase 3. So when I started through the process, and I asked them, I was like, so how many participants are you looking for? They're like, 1. I'm like, 1 in all of Canada? They're like, yes, 1 in all of Canada at the moment. And I'm like, okay, it's not a big population, obviously, sure, I get it, but at the same time, they're like, yeah, just keep going, do all the blood tests, the medical record, you know, testing, analysis, like all the questionnaires, 400 questions in my case. So I had to go through all of that, not knowing whether or not I will actually get into the study. So, you know, there was like a little bit of flicker of hope inside of me that I was like, maybe I'm the one, but that process took 2-3 months, and I had to go through it all, do all this admin work, not knowing whether or not I even get it, until like one night at 9:30 at night, the therapist called and is like, you're doing your first MDMA session in 2 weeks. I was like, oh, okay, but, you know, but that process was very hard, very hard. Yeah. So, what you were saying?
Yeah, I'll add to that. Well, the very practical thing with these theme here, questionnaires, so many of them, and just the method of delivery of those questionnaires can really make a difference to your experience of being in the trial. I had one sort of set of questionnaires delivered electronically, so you could just click on an app. The other one were paper-based questionnaires, and each questionnaire is really long. Some of them are like up to 8 pages long, and the table, the bar that tells you what 1 means and what 10 means is really different in each questionnaire. So you go through 8 pages where 1 means really good, and then you start the next questionnaire and 1 means really bad, and then you realize you're actually not getting your data right because you've got tabled the bar of the previous questionnaire in your head. It's like, why don't they just print it on the top of every page so that you can, like, your eyes can glance up and just see what your measurement points are supposed to be. And that's a really practical thing, instead of like scrolling back 8 pages to see what does 1 mean again. Really very practical things, and then you think, I actually can't do this right now, this is just too much, I'm getting it wrong, and then you're crossing things, and then you need an initial and date everything you cross out, and like, this is actually getting to be a bit of a circus. And there are really practical and simple ways to make it easy for people to fill out the questionnaires. And I think that's the kind of feedback that people who have gone through the process can actually feed into the process. I just want to pick up on the point Ian made about like demand for spaces. I was speaking to some of the researchers here, some trials that haven't even started the recruitment because there are rumors of the trial starting. They already have like 200 people emailing and expressing interest. I mean, that's without even saying you're open for recruitment. So there's something about how you manage expectations and the likelihood of getting on retreats. I've, in our circles and the participants we know from the previous Imperial trials, I think I know of about 8 people now who applied for the DMT trial, and I was the only one to get in. On some level, I feel a bit like I've got survivor's guilt. It's like, I don't know why I got in and you didn't. I'm almost a bit embarrassed to say I've done this now, because you deserve it as much as I do. And, you know, everyone, when I have mentioned it, they've been deeply, you know, encouraging and supportive, but you can see that flicker in their eyes of like, I really needed that too. And then so within the participant community, it creates like a real, like, you know, challenge for us as humans to relate to each other with these experiences that aren't equal across the board.
Yeah, and maybe the others can say a little bit about the hype and the pressure that all of the media attention puts on you as participants, because you said you're one of only one, like one of the very few patients that get this. So does this put pressure on you? I'm sure it does, but what kind of pressure do you experience as a participant?
I experienced exactly the same thing as Leonie by getting onto the Compass trial. You know, I don't know for a fact, but I think I'm probably one of the very first people that's been able to take part in 2 clinical trials looking at the effect of psilocybin on depression. There would be more people that have now, but yeah, it's like that. Well, I don't deserve this second chance, but then I'd spent 4 years, 4 very difficult years, as my depression came back. Again, you know, it's hopefully not news to anyone in this room. They're not wonder drugs that one dose and you're cured forever, you know, and living in that space and just desperately waiting for the next trial. So, yeah, there is that guilt. There is that feeling of just like, well, there are so many more people like me out there that desperately need this treatment. Who am I to come along and steal one of their places in some respects? You know, I've had my bite of the cherry. But that's the thing, these treatments, it's really difficult because yes, great, you know, we're the inverted commas lucky ones, you know, we've managed to take part in these trials. But we've also had a very bright light shone, maybe, that's made us feel better initially. Maybe we've had an afterglow, not guaranteed, but hopefully we've had that. But the sheer intensity of that light, when you do go back to your depression, is even harder to bear. So we need what Eddie was advocating for. We need access to these treatments on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and that brings me to another question. Was this part of the support? Were you prepared at all that this could happen?
The team, say the Imperial team, were absolutely lovely, completely supportive, very compassionate, heart-led people. I couldn't have asked for any better, you know, and keep referring to Eddie's presentation, but you know, that deep trust and bond was definitely there. It had to be there for it to work properly, for me to let go properly. They did their best. I can track my emails afterwards, getting increasingly more desperate to the team. When's the next phase of the trial? How can I access this, you know? And they were always responsive, always supportive. But what could they do? Say, oh, the next phase of the trial is in 4 years' time, which is when Leonie took part in it, you know. So it's a huge burden for them to carry as well, I imagine. And they did their best, but you know, it's like this is the lab rat thing. This is the guinea pig thing. You know, it's like, well, we've gone through this. You have your data. We don't have any ongoing support, you know, and the teams are, you know, I have not met anyone involved in this research that is in it with malicious intent or doesn't care deeply about the participants, But there are limitations, and we fall between those cracks all the time.
So my experience was a bit different, and that's partially down to a global pandemic. I did the trial in December 2019, it was just before lockdown, and a lot happened actually. I won't go into that right now, but what did happen because of lockdown is that Rosalind Watts, who was the clinical investigator on the trial, started offering online integration calls because she wasn't running a trial anymore. She was at home, locked down. And so I was in a really fortunate situation where part of what we're talking about and suggesting needs to happen was starting to happen. So we were in this surreal situation where we were all at home and we were all scheduling these calls with other participants. I met participants for the first time and we started just, it wasn't even proper integration, it was just sharing circles at that point. And Ros started developing her, what is now known as the ACE integration program, which is ultimately how I met Ian. He then joined the calls later that year when we started doing the integration work through, it was at Synthesis at the time. But that, to me, that has almost been that year of work, the fact that it was so nature connected, you know, I'd do the calls and then sit in my garden. I really watched the seasons that year, maybe because we were all locked down, right? But, you know, the idea and the lessons from the trees and letting go and the leaves and that invitation to slow down and to be rooted and to be still and to have a solid core were lessons and somatic experiences that I got that were embedded post-trial because of the ongoing sort of calls and support. It's really not that hard to put that in place. It is why Ian and I are now wanting to set up sort of community connection circles for participants, because you know every time we speak at different panels and things, inevitably we're getting people coming up to us with tears in their eyes that they've finally found somebody else speaking about a similar experience. Ian and I are lucky. We've got friends, spouses, families who really support what we've done and what we're doing. But there have been participants who can't speak to their spouses, have no one to speak to, feel really alienated. So just us being on stage and they can come up to us like another human that they can connect with. A lot of those people have gone to the established integration groups in the communities, but often that's through recreational use or maybe unsupported use, so there's no set and setting. A lot of those people are in those integration groups in a sort of crisis management mode, which is quite different to trying to integrate an experience which has been, through the trial process, safe and supported, but you need a space to integrate that particularly unique experience or process. So participants who've gone to many of the open groups have, again, not found a space where they can really get the support that they particularly need. So I don't think who funds this, what it looks like. I think, you know, again, pro bono, so many people just doing this work because it needs to be done. But I think this is where the conversation's leading or what needs to happen next.
Yeah, and it's almost astonishing to realize that it's something that they figured out, forced into this by COVID, not something that they had thought of up front, that this was going to be important. So yeah, I agree. So if anyone is here in the room and wants to support you, I think it's a very important thing to support. And you also mentioned something about the therapist relationship. Maybe you can start off, Pedro. How, and I'm curious to hear from all of you, but what were your experiences like having a relationship with your therapist?
Definitely one of the hardest thing to manage, because going into it, I didn't trust them. I just didn't trust anyone in the world probably back then. So it took such a long time to, first of all, to trust them, to be like, oh, you're gonna drug me, I'm gonna be in this room with you with 8 hours. And, you know, and again, this was in Montreal, there's a history with McGill and there was some CIA history there. I'm like, what if this is another CIA experiment? I was real about it, right? Who knows? So it was very hard to build that trust, but I think what helped, at least the good job that my therapist did, was that they were very real, they were very human, they were very authentic, and that really helped me. And then once I started noticing we had a few things in common, like, they had a 5-year-old daughter, like, well, back then 2.5, we had very similar lifestyles to some extent. I later on even found out we had some shared friends. So I think them sharing that information, it really allowed me to build that trust with them. And then obviously something that is unique with MDMA is that under the effect of MDMA, you obviously just trust, you're just more trusting anyway. So I think from the first session onward, then it really facilitated building that therapeutic alliance, which it's not that easy.
So is that something that grew throughout the therapy, or was that firmly established?
No, I think it grew, definitely. But to extend that, then towards the end, I was like, so what do we do now? Like, you know, I finally found 2 people who care about me, and now this is gonna end, so what do we do? And they didn't know what they were gonna do, so but they were like, well, technically, because this is, if you were our clients or patients, we couldn't have anything after, but because this is research, we are not bounded by, let's say, the Psychiatry Association or Psychology Association. So they were like, we have some wiggle room, but they were really open. We discussed it extensively. And I'm lucky to say that I'm still in touch with my therapist, and one of them at least has been a lifesaver and has gone above and beyond to really help me sometimes outside of even his responsibilities. So I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, right. So that's been a personal choice of an individual therapist making the decision to go outside of the bounds of the clinical trial, right? So does that mean, before we go into that direction, I'm keen to hear from Leonie and Ian as well, because you've had 2 different experiences, and Leonie has been in 2 different kinds of trials, and I can imagine that it's different for psilocybin and DMT than it is for MDMA.
Yeah, well, I was thinking that as well, because for me, my facilitators on the trial felt very much like, they often describe themselves as cabin crew or a train conductor. The DMT visualization is very much a train, a roller coaster that goes down quick and fast. And with that kind of relationship, it's, not as interpersonal on some level, I'm feeling from what you're saying. I think it was very much about a capacitating and turning into inner wisdom and inner healing. And so it felt quite different, I think, from that point of view. I have, all of the guides I've had, I had the same guide, one of the dyad was the same on both my trials. So in a way, what was interesting is the experiences I had deepened the second time around. I think people have wildly different experiences with psychedelics on each journey, but for me, I'm definitely, I'm officially doing the plant thing and getting to the roots. I'm understanding now. I'm seeing the themes. I'm really drawing them out. And it was really lovely to have the same guide who was able to reflect that back to me, having seen that journey and then this next journey, which again, as a model for treatment, does make you think, like, going forward, would you have the same person? I said in the Q&A of the last session that maybe, some therapists don't actually provide integration support or therapeutic support to people that they've guided on a journey. So it'll be interesting to see how people, what therapists think of that as the space develops.
Yeah, I think that it's such a difficult process both for participants and practitioners because of that. You need that deep bond, but then, if there's too much of an attachment there, then, that's problematic within the frameworks that we have at the moment. So my experience was similar to Pedram's, really. I walked through the world not feeling, and similar to yours as well, because you've referred to this too, not feeling safe in the world, not being able to switch off at all, really. Without going into too much detail, my depression and my experiences with, mental health problems, I think, have really been sort of triggered by abuse in my family when I was a child, etc. So my trust just, that's why I don't, once you have that issue of trust with somebody that is like one of your primary caregivers or whatever, you should have that trust. It compromises every other relationship you have. So before the Imperial trial, I'm so glad that there was a 10 milligram and a 25 milligram dose. I got to know the team as well as you can in however many sessions, 3 sessions I think it was. We went deep, we covered a lot. I liked them as people. But the first dose, I was rigid on the bed, wouldn't turn over because I was worried about being rude to them. I was like, I don't want to upset them by turning my back, and I was just like frozen. And that was also a sign of resistance to the psilocybin, 10 milligrams. That was possible to resist still. So I didn't really get as much out of that as maybe I could have done if I'd had that full trust and been able to let go. That's why I think having 2 doses in trials, again, money, but having 2 doses is so vital because it helped me to discuss everything after that, to say these were the sticking points, these were the problems, and also to deepen that trust, to say I was scared about turning over, I was scared to do this, I didn't feel I could let go. And they really helped me to sort of talk through all of that. And the whole in and through mantra really, really like resonated deeply within me of like, they were like, you have permission to laugh, cry, like wet yourself. I was worried about that. That was my last remaining way of just like, oh, I've got to cling on. Do I need the toilet? Do I need the toilet? During the 10 milligram dose, you know? And it was another way of resisting. So all of that, they were like, do what you need to do. Laugh, cry, shout, scream, crawl up in a ball, whatever. So the trust was there for that second dose. And I do think maybe that's an issue with single dose, you know, this is your one shot, all the pressure's on that. And also my whole team were men, which in light of what happened to me growing up was maybe why I didn't trust as much as I may have done. But yeah, they won my trust before the second dose. And I think that's why it was so effective.
Yeah, it's interesting and also a little astonishing to me that given your history, that your therapists were both men. Is that something that was discussed, and your issues of, maybe this is too personal and don't share if you don't want to, but that it may have been more difficult for you to let go because of this?
Potentially, but also maybe it was part of me being able to gain trust in men. So, you know, I think there was a flip side to that. So yes, it made it more difficult to trust, but when I did, you know, when I did fully let go, I was able to trust the men in that room. So, you know, I think maybe there was a lesson in there itself, potentially.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way of looking at it. Yeah, and it's impressive that you were able to do that. Yeah, many different directions I could take, but one of them is this, the pressure on the single or the two doses. That's something that I heard from a lot of patients. An example is the participants in the phase 2 MDMA trial. They had two doses, 2 MDMA sessions. And one of them, for example, their first dose was very effective, treated the root cause of their index trauma, but then also realizing, oh shit, there is so much underneath there that still needs to be addressed. And now I'm open, and now I only have one session in which all of this needs to be addressed because after that the therapy ends, and then I don't know. Is this something that came up for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think with the Compass trial was so pressured because it was one dose, it was double blind as well. You may not get an active dose. So there's so much pressure, and as somebody living with anxiety and depression, you're just like, well, that's something else to make you anxious and depressed. You know, do I get it? Don't I get it? If I do get it, which I hope I do, can I deal with it? And I came out of the Compass trial feeling like I'd failed. I didn't get the afterglow. I didn't get what I should have got out of it, you know. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, sorry.
It's, yes. yeah, no, definitely. And it's, yeah, because I'm curious, what do you think were the differences between the Imperial one and the Compass one?
Yeah, so, yeah, a huge difference because during the Imperial one, I would say the 10 milligram dose was about mapping, really. You're in this space, yeah, I've got my hang-ups, I've got my reservations, I'm not trusting people fully, you know, I'm not rolling over, worried about going to the toilet every 30 seconds, you know. All of that stuff, and I was able to come back, report back, you know, after my Arctic expedition, you know, into this territory, and go, right, these are the things that we need to look at, this is what was difficult. There was none of that possible with the Compass trial, you know, it just wasn't possible to do that, and you know, you do feel like there's so much, there is a pressure on you, I think, in some respects, that it's almost like I felt after the Compass trial, not just like utterly disappointed, crushed by it. I'm so glad there was a team there to help you reframe it afterwards. We'll come to that maybe later, but I felt like I'd let everyone in that room down. They'd put hours and hours and hours of time into me, and there I was letting them down, you know? Nobody made me feel that way, but that's how I felt.
So in ceremonial usage, they often do exactly that. They'll have a sort of smaller dose to familiarize you with the territory, and then a deeper dive. I'm hearing what Pedram's saying about, like, you were saying, sorry, about starting with realizing the index causes, but there's so much more, and there's only one more session. I've kind of come at it from a different perspective. I had 2 25 milligram doses 3 weeks apart for Imperial. the idea of going back into that, only 3 weeks later, was like, wow, did anyone think about the timings of this? Maybe I need a little bit more time to integrate before we go back in there. I'm not saying I don't want to go back in there, but that's, yeah, that's quite something. So that experience actually stayed with me going into the DMT trial, which was also 2-dose. First one, I got a placebo. Second one, I got the dose. Everyone was guaranteed a second dose. First one, you know, either or. If I'm perfectly honest, when I got the placebo, part of me breathed a sigh of relief, because I thought, whew, I still have a chance, and it won't be 2 of them like 2 weeks apart. And having had the experience I did, which was really intense, I do wonder. I don't know what the science is about how you space these out. About like, I think what we're all agreeing to is that it's not once and done, and there is need for another one. And maybe there's questions about whether it's a smaller dose and then a bigger dose. So there's definitely something about more than one dosing. But yeah, I'd raise the question about like how far apart are they spaced? How much time do you need integration-wise in these trials? Because yeah, if I had my second DMT experience the first time, yeah, I'd be interested to see if people dropped out at that point. Because you know, it was such an intense experience with psilocybin, even though it's you know, lovely and ego dissolving. There was something about the DMT experience that like blew the door off the hinges. Every single construct I've ever had dissolved. And you know, it was oceanic bliss at one moment, and then it was hell. And to do that 2 weeks later, with only maybe 2 sessions with my therapist and maybe 1 Zoom call with the trial people, I was like, that's too much. Need a bit more time. And I think that's our message for the whole psychedelic sector, is like, let's all just slow down in the speed of the trials, in the speed of the commercialization. Let's all just slow down and breathe.
Yeah. Yeah, and that reminded me, because you go into a trial for depression, and then all of a sudden your whole concept of what the world is like, of reality, gets blown apart, and then you have 2 integration sessions to prepare for the next session, if at all. So how does anyone deal with that?
Well, because I had a placebo, breathed a sigh of relief. But yeah, I mean, with the 2 imperial trials, it was challenging. And I think that, you know, that's why I say about put the warning on the box if this goes out to market. It's like this needs to be a slow process, and you need to have not only therapeutic support but community support, and that's where I hope we get to a point that Pedram was saying about this is how we change the dialogue in society at large. I think that's been my overall take from both trials now. I don't see myself as a sick person anymore. I am a person who has, you know, some things I'm trying to change, some root reflexes and learned behaviors which come to me all too quickly, but I'm actually, deep down, I'm okay, and I want to be functional in a society and bring that okayness there.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can add to that is, I think painting a picture between, like, one thing is to do psychedelics, to go to Peru, do ayahuasca, or come to Netherlands doing truffles. One thing is going to a clinical trial. Like, a lot of times I feel like people just think they're the same. They're just not, right? Like, going to a clinical trial is a lot more time consuming and energy intensive and takes a lot out of you. And it's a very rigid process for something that otherwise is very organic. Like the human healing, it's not rigid. It's not linear, it's very organic, and then I feel like in a clinical trial we're bringing like so much logics and rules and putting things in boxes, and it goes against the nature of healing. And that's what needs to change, I hope so.
Yeah, I'd echo that and say I think because all the clinical trials are 1 person to 2 therapists, at times I felt a bit like a fish in a goldfish bowl. I took my mask off and I was like, I'm going to go have a wee. It's like, everyone, are you okay? Yeah. Can you walk? Yeah, I can walk, I'm fine. You know, and it's great that there was that attention, but I think if I was one of, 10 people on a retreat, I have had a ceremonial experience since. And having 10 people who are going through their own process, but in a shared container, is so healing, so healing to then come out of that. And while you've had your own very unique process, you were all in the same container, and then to be able to relate to those people, which is why Ian and I are trying to do that same thing, but in the clinical context. Like, how do we bring the participants together? They're not going to have the journey on the same day. Maybe there'll be trials that are delivered in group therapy, but right now that's not the case. But how can we still replicate, as much as we can, that potential of like having that communal support afterwards?
Yeah, I could just add to that. I think one thing that brings at least the three of us together is this is such an uncommon commonality, right? And it's just, there's not a lot of us, right? So even within MAPS, it's less than 400 people. And unfortunately, there's no effort around bringing people together, because even talking to others, even your own therapists, or even people like Jos who knows about the space a lot, it's like, you can't really share with them, or you can't really be like, do you really know what I'm talking about? You know, people just nod their heads and they're like, yeah. But at the moment you talk to somebody else who's gone through a trial, it's just this immediate, I get you, you get me thing. And so we need more of that. We need definitely, so if the trials are designed, they should already at least ask, would you like to be in touch with other participants? And those of us that say yes, we should have an opportunity to meet each other. It's such a struggle to find others, and it's only a few of us out there who are willing to come out of the closet and say that I've done this work, which has then allowed others to say like, hey, like, you know, we need to get together. And that's not being done through the organizations or the study sponsors, unfortunately.
I would also say that kind of uniqueness can be a problem in sort of shared integration circles as well. Like, you're seen as some sort of precious unicorn, you know, because you've taken part in these clinical trials, you know, and everyone's like, oh, tell me about it, because their experience is so different. And while it's understandable that people have that curiosity, I'm not blaming them, it's natural, to know that you could have a space where it's just trial participants, you know, initially, and then maybe you'll feel like going to these wider integration circles would be so vital, because as, you know, as you've both said, it's a very different experience.
Yeah, and did you receive any practical support in terms of what happens after the trial ends? So, and maybe also you can say a little bit about what your experience was right when the trial ends, or when the follow-up, the last follow-up has been done. What have your experiences been of that period?
I think for me, in 2015, pre-hype, virtually no money, hence 20 people. I think it took nearly 3 years, I think, to get all of the relevant licenses in place. It was really hard work. It's not like now where there are so many trials, you know, coming up. So, I'm sorry, I keep losing my thread here. So,
when the trial ends, what was your experience then?
So there weren't the resources there. The money wasn't there really, or maybe integration isn't a new thing, is it? You know, so I'm sure it was on their radar, but you know,
I'm curious about your experience personally. What did it feel like when the trial ended? Was there any continuous support?
Yeah, that's what I'm going on to. So there was no money for integration. There was no money for these sessions really. So it was kind of, yes, they were helpful, yes, they were supportive. But there were no even shared integration groups to go to afterwards. So I was very much out there trying to do my best. So after the Imperial trial, listening to the playlist, like every day, bits of it here and there to reconnect to those places I'd been to, I knew that was helping me. I knew that writing about it helped me. So I was reading the journal entries I'd written during the whole experience, reading about the 2 doses or whatever, trying to find ways to reconnect. But that goes from being a comforting thing of like, oh yeah, I'm back there. Part of me is back there. A little bit of me is back there, to grasping and going, oh, it's getting away from me. How do I get it back? How do I get back to those places, you know, within myself? And that's when desperation kicks in, the afterglow wears off, and gradually you go back to the same patterns again, you know, sadly. There was more after the Compass trial. There was an integration group to go to. Even if I was one of the unicorns in there, you know, it still helped to an extent to be able to share those experiences, you know.
No, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, yeah, I'm curious because when the trial ends, do people connect you? Do they help you get follow-up treatment, therapy? Is there any, do they at least help you with the continuation of where to go? Or
I could share on my experience if you want. So in my case, no, they were not ready for it. I think they just talked to another site and they're like, what do you guys do? I think they called it exit plan. It was a bunch of papers with like, these are a few things you could do to help you, and like name of 3 therapists that they recommended. They said, if you want to continue, these are the people. But I always use that term. I said, maps ruined therapy for me. And that's because, like, I'm like, where am I going to find 2 other therapists? You know, like, is one even enough? Like, I need 2, or should they be 2 male, 2 female? Like, you know, like, I actually struggle after that to be able to, like, find another person who would get me, who understands clinical trial, who understands, like, you know, the treatment that I received, how the psychotherapy was done, and the people that they recommended obviously didn't know anything about that. So I didn't feel like they could actually support me. So since then, I've struggled to actually find a therapist that I could really feel connected with and know that gets it. And that's why it's missing again. It's just not part of the design of the trial, unfortunately.
Yeah, I absolutely pick up on that point. When I finished the Imperial trial, I got a postcard with a graphic of the therapeutic model that was used, and I was told that there was a WhatsApp group for past participants, and that was it. So part of what we're advocating as Psypan is, well, and this is why we need to be there at the beginning of when trials are being designed, is like, what information can we ethically give to people? Like, you know, people are, as I say, when we talk, come up to us afterwards, well, wouldn't it be a kind and moral and responsible thing to say, hey, there are a group of people out there who've had a similar experience. If you feel like connecting, this is where you go. Here's the website address, here's a leaflet. So maybe just something about, like, I think leaving, aside from the playlist, which is so crucial, leaving with something sort of tangible, maybe some kind of resources, is a really simple thing to do to help people feel that they have something to go back out with into the world. And yeah, no, that wasn't that. When I did struggle, the team recommended some psychedelic therapists, and there's obviously there's some websites in the UK for that database of psychedelic informed therapists. So now when people contact us, I signpost them onto that. But I think that's the kind of information we could pass on to make a substantial difference at a crucial point in time for people.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I see that we have about 11 minutes left, and I would like to open the floor to questions from the audience as well.
Thank you so much, guys. I wanted to ask if each of you can maybe say one thing about competencies that you feel are important for psychedelic-assisted psychotherapists from your own experience. And also wanted to ask, I hope it's okay, I'm asking 2 questions, if not, skip the second one, but I think your Psypan initiative is amazing, and I really loved it that you said that you're working on thinking of towards creating accreditation process for clinical trials, for clinical trials. And I wanted to ask what, in that context, you think is important for clinical trials to provide for patients. Thank you.
This is what happens when you ask 2 questions. Nobody remembers the first question. So you can go ahead with the second question.
So what was your first question? Because I also forgot it.
The first question was about you guys find relevant.
Relevant competencies for psychedelic therapists, according to your perspective.
For the therapist.
Yeah.
Yes.
In my case, for example, I can say understanding the cultural differences, you know, so like, you know, if you're from a different culture or they have different background, for them to understand the differences, knowing more about your history, where you come from. I think the more they know about you, the better. And if they don't, then asking questions, be like, I don't know, can you tell me about that? Or I heard this, is this true? Just being curious, what they tell you to be able to do, you know, like, you should be curious. I'm like, they should also be curious and wanting to learn more about you and your history. So I think that's very important.
For me, it's been the way my therapists really helped encourage the inner healer in me. They weren't, for the first time in my life, it wasn't a person in a white coat who would fix my problem. So that ability to really foster and bring out in the person that they have agency and they're on this journey, and that you're a cabin crew and you're empowering them was a really important thing. I think practically speaking, I think for therapists, it's so important, and it's a whole different discussion about sort of ethics, but touch, like how the touch a therapist can give you in a session like this is really important, and they need to feel confident in how they use it, and it needs to be negotiated ahead of the experience. So, and then post-dosing day, I think therapists should have some kind of, because I think it is such a somatic thing. Increasingly, we're looking at so many things to support the integration work, which isn't just talking about it. So for therapists to have an idea of different modalities that they can refer people on to post-treatment, because I think, dancing, who knew you needed just more music? Is so much about getting into your body and feeling and moving through things in a really practical way. Not that I'm saying therapists should be dancing in session, but yeah, knowing what's out there and supporting you in that.
So we can all integrate tonight.
Yeah, well, let's go integrate. I'll be dancing.
I think, with these experiences, everyone's experiences are so wildly different. So how do you kind of draw common strands together? It's very difficult, but there are some really, basic, important foundations, I think, for people going through this experience, I'd say that for me, the trust building, that's vital to everyone. That's a common foundational thing, for me. And that's trust in the people you're with, that's trust in yourself, that's trust in the substance as well. Trusting you can deal with it. And you really need to work as a team to help you get into that place. There are other optional things. That's, during our presentation, talking about tailoring treatments. Now, again, the financial alarm bells go off for many people in this room. How much do we allow people to choose? But choice is very important, without hopefully compromising the research. Longer term, we need to look at this when they become treatments. You need choice. You need to be asked, what kind of playlist do you want? Taking into account the cultural sensitivities of the person you're treating. Do you want to go home, or do you want to stay somewhere comfortable nearby? You're back the day after anyway. So for me, travelling back in a sweaty, stuffy taxi, back to feeling travel sick, going through the rain-lashed streets of London was the worst thing, setting-wise, post-dose, I could have done. It was horrible, So there are some really key things. There are choice points, and we hope to help organisations find those choice points and get them to weave those into their treatment models. That's the hope.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. One up front, and Anna here in the back.
Hi, thank you so much. I was wondering, in your studies, was there any support for your family members and spouses at all? And how difficult did you find in your experience that was?
Not that I can recall. Not really. So my wife came to collect me on both occasions, after the first dose in the Imperial trial and during the only dose of the Compass trial. I was so grateful there was a tube strike for the second dose for the Imperial trial, meaning I couldn't go home in that horrible taxi environment. I had to stay on campus, But yeah, my wife was there for that. There was an interview that she did after the Imperial trial, but really nothing to kind of support her in how to deal with me in that neuroplastic state, the revelations I'd had. Thankfully, I've got a very empathetic and very compassionate wife, so lucky me, and very supportive. But, there wasn't really anything to prime her as to what to expect. That's such an important point.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that as Saipan we're really advocating for. And I was really struck, I listened to Paul Stamets speaking, and he said he had 2 people come to him end of life who wanted to take some psilocybin mushrooms, and he actually said no. And the reason is because their spouses weren't going to be doing it too. And his advice was, it's really stayed with me, I'm really still digesting it, that at that late stage, for you to have those kind of profound experiences which could destabilize your relationship to a really big point, he didn't want to take that responsibility on. And there is something about being responsible for giving out these medicines. So, yeah, I'm not saying we now need to make sure all the spouses get psychedelics at the same time, but what I am saying is maybe if they're not psychedelic aware, if they're psychedelic naive, maybe just again, it's that information, something, you know, setting before the trial, give them information what they need to know, how your partner might be, what kind of support is available for them if you're worried about them. And those are things that we can, again, simple interventions that will make the world of difference, because that hasn't been the case so far.
Timon here up front.
So thank you so much for sharing these very intimate stories and these great insights. I myself am a therapist at a MAPS trial in the Netherlands and also an investigator. And at our site, everyone is already in therapy with us. Then they enter the study, and after the study they go back to their therapists. So there is where the integration is continued. And still you see those people struggling. So the transformations are very visible, very profound. And I think the point you are making is that it's beautiful, this model, and it helps a lot. But so much more needs to be done. If you look at the research papers, it's all just these short trials with magical results, but behind that there's so much work. And the question I have for you is, what do you think would really help with the integration if someone would continue after a trial with a therapist? What kind of interventions, modalities do you think would really help integrating this even further?
So I think for me, it's the plant analogy again. I think the missing picture in what you've so beautifully described is that those people went back in their solo activities to a therapist in a one-on-one encounter, and it's about them and their issues and therapy again. There was no description there. Again, we're missing that wider context. Yes, we want to change the whole world, and but we're not going to do that. So can we just start by putting that person in a circle of people afterwards as part of the integration process? I think that simple act would help a lot of people, prevent a lot of people falling off a cliff. Because, I mean, it's wonderful they have that support. I mean, that's the very first thing, the minimum thing you should do. But if those people are still falling off, then you ask why. And I think for us, our experience is very much about having a circle of people again, community.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So sure, I'll try to give it back. So the late great Mark Fisher said that depression is the shadow side of an entrepreneurial culture. What happens when magical voluntarism confronts limited opportunities? And that we need to reverse the privatization of stress and recognize that mental health is a political issue. So my question to you is, to what extent do you think mental health is a political issue? Did you go back to a job you didn't like soon after these trials, for example? Because, of course, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very important point and a great quote as well. I think that the problem for many of us is that we go from a society that doesn't sustain and support us back into a society that doesn't sustain and support us. So you can point the finger, you can say it's political, you can say it's capitalism. You know, we're talking about deep-rooted system change yet again, and that's overwhelming. But you know, there's a reason why so many of us are struggling at the moment. You know, and it's all blamed on us as individuals. We're not looking outward. We're not saying, well, is it the systems that we're part of that are causing these issues? And until we start, even on a small scale, like we're hoping to connect people, we can change our circle of influence. We can't change the world. Hopefully, it ripples outward. That's the hope. That's all we can hope for, really. But yeah, until we have a more supportive, you know, container to exist within, this is just going to continue getting worse, I would say.
All right, final question.
Yes. Yes, can I add to that?
Oh, yeah, sure, of course, sorry.
I just wanted to say, there are ways, and it's really important that we feel empowered. It can be really all doom and gloom. So for me, I didn't go back to the same job. I'm looking at Saipan. I just made it, this is an idea, deep root to change, and this is what roots and change looks like. It's affecting the work I'm doing. It's affecting my children. They go to a small democratic, self-directed learning environment where they have sociocracy circles to reach decisions. The teachers aren't on pedestals with surnames. They're learning about power structures. I'm exploring the idea of our family moving to an intentional community. I don't want to share a house because I need my space, but I want to be with people. And I want to see the apocalypse out, not alone, right? And so these are the changes we can, as people within communities, start making. So yeah, my life is not the same anymore.
All right, yeah, a really final question now. Matteo? Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for the panel and your talks before and sharing your experiences with us. On a similar line, I guess, is my question, maybe a bit more specific. You've both, and Eddie, I believe, is that your name? Made references and critiques to kind of the research model and how care ends and there's no continuation, the need for that, how hard it is to find it, the fact that you need to pay for it often, and so on. And I was wondering, with this idea of extended care and finding the support for it, whether, even though I fully understand your focus on the patients right now, whether you also envision yourselves as a potential platform for political advocacy, also in the face of austerity measures and lack of public financing for the care that we so much need, and also therapists need because they're so overwhelmed with caring responsibilities. Thank you.
We have, obviously, in many countries, a lack of capacity within the care system. So that's why we need, the mental health in the UK, particularly, the only way to access, in most areas, mental health services is to be in crisis now. So if it's not life or death, you see nobody, So if you're heading that way, so be it. You have to get to that final point and then hope the help comes to you. It's really difficult. We on a very basic level, but this takes funding. Of course, we need greater infrastructure. We need more therapists. We need more people to do this work. But we have to bear in mind the situation that we're dealing with. So we just have to find other ways to connect people, to make people feel that they have a home to go to after they've taken part in these trials. It's really difficult. With a population as large as we have on planet Earth, surely, yes, if there isn't a large enough proportion of those people being therapists, etc., we have to think of other ways to connect people to each other, and that's what we're trying to do. We have to deal with this. We hate the situation ourselves. We wish it was different, but we have to deal with the cards we're dealt, basically, I think. Yeah, and there are ways of doing it, and therein lies some hope, I think, for us.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add on that I'm grateful that the two of you started such a thing, but this is almost responsibility of the researcher and the therapists out there. Let's not put this on us again, right? So if you're in this space and you're working, I use the analogy of if you're working in a hospital and you keep seeing people coming to the hospital with broken legs and arms, and then they're like, what's going on? They're like, well, people are having a lot of car accidents, right? Okay, cool. So what should you do? Should you keep improving the treatments in the hospital, or do you make the roads safer? So if you're working in a hospital and you think that now with psychedelic therapy, that's it, we are gonna now fix it and everything will be fine, but while we have an unsafe world out there and the roads remain unsafe, then that's not a revolution. So let's not think that this is it. So while you do that, please be also aware that we also need to do some political, societal changes to make sure we don't get broken in the first place.
Yeah, I think that about wraps it up. Thank you all very much for being here, for sharing your stories, for hopefully making this world a little safer for the participants. So thank you very much.
Oh, you better.
Photo.
Oh, I want this.
Yeah, just like the question.